so, but they almost all work the same. And we got a couple growers in the house. So my name is Mike. I'm with Oakville Bluegrass Cooperative. I've got Keith Berns on from Green Cover Seed, and we are going to talk about perennial cover, permanent cover, conservation cover. I think all the different types of cover crop that fall into NRCS 327. And the goal here is to share information, of course, about what Oakville Bluegrass has for growers, primarily on the West Coast. I think we've been focused on California, but really we can support growers in the orchard and vineyard segment, primarily Washington, Oregon, California, and even Arizona, with our grant that we've got, and in terms of the carbon farming program that we have, similar geography and focus on vineyard and orchard crops there as well. But the reason I've got Keith here today is because we have this grant, $3.5 million to disperse across up to 110 acres per grower for the establishment of perennial cover. And I think the main thing that, like, what's that even mean? Like, a lot of growers are, well, what's perennial cover mean compared to annual cover? Does that mean I have to have something green competing with my crops all year round? No. So we've got this grant that helps growers establish cover by keeping living roots in the soil, reducing tillage, and not having to buy new seed every year, and kind of relying on what could establish, eventually become permanent cover. Could be multi-species, could be single species. So we've got a lot of flexibility, but what does that all mean, and what should growers expect? And Keith brings probably some of the deepest and most diverse experience in the U.S. when it comes to sourcing, selling, seeding cover crops of all types all over the U.S. And so I want to tap into Keith's experience and the experience of Green Cover Seed here to discuss, like, what is that differentiation in your, with perennial cover versus annual, pros and cons, expectations management, et cetera. So with that, Keith, I want to kick it to you. Just, give an intro about who you are, what you've been doing, and why we should dig into this topic with you.
So my brother and I, so our operation is located in South Central Nebraska. My brother and I grew up on this farm, and we've been really farming here all of our lives. I did teach school for 10 years. I was a ag teacher, and then kind of morphed over into technology for 10 years right out of college. And then when my dad retired, my wife and our family, we moved back to the farm and then started farming with my brother. And so we were very involved in the no-till organizations, and that eventually led us into the cover crop world, which, we were very skeptical, very nervous at first until we saw it working on our own operation. And I think that's one of the things that sets us apart is, we aren't just selling these products, we're using them as well. And so that does give us an advantage, because we do have an investment in it on our own operation, as well as helping thousands of other growers across the country to do it. So we started Green Cover in 2009. And, that first year it was just, my brother and I and a couple of our kids that were running the operation, and we sold enough seed to cover about 1,000 acres that first year. But it's grown, and it's been a real blessing. God really had blessed the timing of all this to happen to where, fast forward 17 years to now, and we have 2 locations and close to 60 employees, and we're shipping 30 million pounds of seed to all 50 states and even to a number of different countries. We sent a couple container loads of cover crop seed to Japan earlier this year, and it's been fun to see how the cover crop, soil health, regenerative ag, whatever you want to call it, has grown, because it's following the principles of nature. It's
Keith, I think we've got some bandwidth issues. Maybe turn off your video. There you are.
Is this any better? What's it sound like now?
I got you back now. I got you back now. Yep. Let's try again. I got.
Should I turn the camera back on?
No, let's just go audio for a minute here. Let's see how that works out.
Okay.
I'll do the same. All right. Keith, yeah, pick up where you are there. Like, we went from 1,000 acres to
yep. So we went
to 50,
from
50
covering
states and overseas too.
Yeah, all 50 states. And so, now we're moving the seed to cover, over 1 million acres a year, and, selling a lot online, and really expanding, from just servicing corn and soybean guys here in our area to working with vineyards and orchards and vegetable growers on the West Coast as well. And so that's been a lot of fun to learn these different types of agriculture and just be able to work with really progressive growers all across the country and throughout the world. We just in the last few weeks, we've had a tour group from the Ukraine, 40 farmers from the Ukraine. We had almost 40 farmers from the Czech Republic come visit us. And it's fun to give those tours. We also learn from what they're doing, in their areas and regions as well. So, yeah, it's been a fun experience to learn lots of new things.
That's great. So, you all have evolved, radically in terms of scope and diversity and geography and coverage and just overall size. Has cover cropping evolved also? Is cover cropping today different than it was, 15, 20 years ago? When somebody says we're doing cover crops now, does that mean more different things today than it did, say 10 or 20 years ago?
That's a good question. And I think it really depends on the producer. Cover crops, nothing new. We're maybe kind of rediscovering it, but our grandfathers and great grandfathers, it would have been a very common practice. It was a regular part of the rotation to use, clover interseeded into their cereal grains. They would have called it a plow down crop or a green manure crop or something like that. I was just reading an article of how George Washington was a huge proponent of cover crops. On Mount Vernon, and very, very cool to know that these are not new concepts, and they've worked throughout millennia, again because it's the agronomic principles of how these systems were designed to work together. So it's nothing new, but when we started using all the commercial inputs, fertility, herbicides, all those kind of got forgotten. And it got kind of put on the back burner because we were able to replace a lot of the services that the biology and the cover crops were delivering. We could replace them with synthetic inputs. And while that can still work, it has taken a toll on our land. It's taken a toll on our profitability. It's taken a toll on the environment. And so we have to figure out how we can kind of take the best of both worlds. Cover crops aren't necessarily going to replace all of those inputs, but can it help us reduce them? Can it help us lessen how much we spend on them? And can we now get back to being more profitable, being more regenerative and sustainable, and rebuild some of what's been lost? So you ask if it's different than it was 15 years ago. For some people, definitely. For others, when they're just getting started, they may start with a fairly simple mix and then kind of build into the more diverse mixes as they get more.
Yeah. What our grant and our focus is permanent cover or perennial cover. And I think one of the challenges that some of the growers we have when we talk to them about that is it's a switch. Right now they're taking action. They're doing something every fall. They're buying seed, they're putting seed in the ground, they're seeing something happen each year. So they get that hit of, okay, I'm doing something and it's actively working for me. Permanent cover, with permanent cover and perennial cover, ideally they can do it once. But it's doing something different for their soil, perhaps. What comes to mind for you in terms of the features and benefits of moving into a permanent cover crop setting as opposed to the annual cover cycle for somebody, especially if they've got their cash crop is permanent. They've got an orchard or vineyard that's also fixed in place. What's that change? What's that mindset change that takes place for you?
Yeah. Well, obviously there's advantages and disadvantages to both annuals and perennials. So to some extent, it kind of depends on what your goals are. And we've got guys even trying to establish permanent cover crops in annual cropping rotations, corn rotations, soybean rotations, which is really hard. And, they're experimenting to see, what could potentially work. It is going to be infinitely easier to do it in a permanent cash crop situation, like a vineyard, like an orchard. And so it makes a lot of sense to, lean into trying to do that. Obviously, the big advantage is once you get it established, you're not out there planting it every year. In some years, planting an establishment is a breeze. The conditions are right. You can get your grapes harvested, you get your nuts harvested, you have a planting window to get in there and get it done, and then the rains fall and everything comes up and it looks beautiful. Other years, the timing is terrible, and it's either too dry to get it up or it starts raining too soon and you just can't get out there and get it done. So those years, having something that is perennial and it just comes up when when it cools down and the rains start, then that's a great system to have. So from an establishment window, the perennials are going to be there. They're going to come on. And while perennials are going to cost more to establish up front, you're not going to have that establishment cost every year. And so again, it kind of depends on what your goals are. You can typically get a lot more diversity with annuals because you can plant a lot of things, but they don't always come up and they don't always all work. So there's again advantages and disadvantages of each system there.
Yeah, and then do perennials, especially in that first establishment year, and I'm sure there's a spectrum here of how they perform. One of the growers that we talked to that came to us and said, I want roots, more roots, less shoots. He's not trying to drive a ton of vegetation or 6 tons of vegetation per acre into his orchard, but he does want the roots underground. And so he's leaning into this because he wants less vegetation. But at the same time, if there's less vegetation, as a grower, I might think it's not actually doing anything. What's the dynamic there of perennial performance, indicators of success early on, and how that might be different or similar to what's going on with annuals when they're being established?
Yeah. Well, as humans, we're very visual, and sometimes we're not very intuitive. And so we base so much of our evaluation of something just simply on what we can easily see. And that would be the above ground growth, of course. But unless you have a spade and you go out there and you start digging, you don't know the whole story. You don't know what's going on below the ground. And frankly, what's going on below the ground is much more important than what you see above the ground, especially when it comes to improving the soil and increasing your soil organic matter. Christine Jones, who has had a huge influence on us, she's an Australian soil scientist, mostly retired now, but she's been into our farm numerous times. who's at our farm, she said this statement, and I've repeated it many times because
Mhm.
I think it's awesome. She says that the carbon that goes into your system through the what she calls the liquid carbon pathway, but it's essentially the carbon that your roots are exuding or pushing
Mhm.
out through the root system. So the underground carbon, if you will, that's 30 to 50 times more likely to become part of your long-term carbon, your long-term organic matter, than any
Wow.
carbon that is produced above the ground. Now,
Wow.
she's not saying that it's 30 to 50 times more important, because it is important that we have above ground carbon, because that's going to be protecting our soil from erosion. That's going to be insulating it from, getting too hot. So there are carbon, organic matter. It's so much more important to have the carbon going into the soil through the liquid carbon coming out the roots than it is the above ground. So what does that mean? Well, it means both are important, but let's focus on roots as much as possible,
Right.
because that's what's really going to build soil long term, and build our aggregation. And when we get those stable soil aggregates, that's when we're going to get so much better infiltration. And that's a huge problem from what I've seen in California vineyards and orchards is,
Mhm.
I will see people irrigating, and that water, instead of going down, it's going sideways. And
Yep.
when it goes sideways, you're going to get a lot more runoff. You're going to get a lot more evaporation. You're going to have a lot more salt issues, because the evaporation is going to take the water away and leave the salts behind. So those are all big issues. And the more roots we have, the more carbon we have in our soil, the better that infiltration will be. And it's not just with the irrigation in season, but you and I were talking, if the super El Nino does come and
Yep.
California gets some big rains, well, that's a blessing if you can get that rain into the ground. It's a bit of a
Mhm.
curse if you can't get it into the ground and it just runs off, because now it's going to lead to erosion and mudslides and flooding. And I mean, we see it all the
Yep.
time that happens. And sometimes it's because you got too much rain, but oftentimes it's because our soils weren't ready to take the rain that came.
Yeah. And we just did a blog about erosion and the different types of erosion. You've got water erosion, you've got wind erosion, even tillage. Tillage can create erosion. In its own way. And thinking about something I read about a month ago was that perennials will leave, keep 10 to 20 tons of roots per acre in the soil. And so even when the vegetation above ground, if they're cool season perennials, you get to June, July, August, the vegetation above ground is effectively gone. It's dead, or it's out of season. But those roots are still there underground. And then you get dynamic weather like we see more and more of. You get an out of sync rainstorm that you didn't expect. Those roots are there to hold soil, but also to help that rain penetrate no matter what season it is. And then, like you mentioned, the El Nino that's coming up, um, protecting the soil above ground, driving in, enabling infiltration below ground, and then holding soil if there is an excess of water that's flowing. Those three things are going to be so critical. And when this El Nino hits, will it be early season, late season? We don't know.
Right.
um, it just makes those things even more important. Um, our AMP grant that we've got, the other side of the coin on the grant is that we're asking growers who are establishing perennial cover to also effectively go to a no-till practice. And one of the challenges there, I think, is that in the orchard setting, for so many orchard crops and vineyards, um, those aisles between those alleys between the cash crops are historically, they're kept clean. Sometimes with almonds it's factory floor clean. It's like just a crisp laser leveled, factory floor clean practice, and there's no litter. And so again, going back to being visual creatures, that's what we have developed to look right or look good. And
Right.
so, but here we're not tilling. We're asking there to be living roots, in the soil year round. How does no-till and perennial cover management work? Am I mowing instead of tilling? Like, what am I doing to keep my production area looking and feeling good to me, from June until September if I can't till, but I want to keep roots in the ground?
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. And frankly, one of the benefits of having a perennial cover crop is that you have to figure out how to manage it without tillage, because
Right.
once you start tilling, you're no longer going to have a perennial. You're going to be, terminating that, and that,
Right.
defeats the whole purpose. It defeats the large investment you made up front. The only way, you have to amortize that seed cost up front over a number of years. So that means you just can't be out there tilling, which means you are going to have better infiltration, and it is going to be better for the soil. So there's a lot of advantages there. So the alleyway management then does become, okay, now what do we do? How do we handle that? Particularly for nut crops that have to get dropped on the ground and have to be swept up, like
Right.
most of the almonds, walnuts are that way. Now there are a few innovative growers starting to do off-ground harvest with almonds, which is really cool to see, because now you have a lot more flexibility of how you can manage your alleyway floors. They don't have to be perfectly clean, and that can lead to a lot of benefits and flexibility there. But that's not the majority of the almond walnut.
We can't wait for it. Now. Like, I don't think we can wait for that.
Yeah. So in that situation, you have a couple things. Number one, because of California's Mediterranean climate, you typically don't get hardly any summer rains. And so whatever perennial you have that is growing out in those alleyways or the row middles is going to have to go dormant. So you have to have perennial species that can handle what would be called a drought-induced dormancy. And some are much better than others. Obviously, the bulbous bluegrass that is a big part of this grant. I mean, that's just one of its things. That's kind of its superpower, if you will. So it's a great fit for that. There are some other species out there that have similar traits that can do that as well. But so if you're not irrigating your row middles, and most vineyard and orchard growers are not, they're doing inline drip irrigation, so they're just watering the tree row or the vine row. You're going to get a drought-induced dormancy out there in the middle, which means you're not going to have much growing, which means probably one or two mowings. You're going to be able to manage that vegetation or the residue out in those row middles pretty easily. Yeah. Now, if you have some sort of micro sprinklers where you are throwing some water out there in the row middles, then you may get more growth. You may have more green, which, from a soil health standpoint is awesome. That's great. But it would lead to a little bit more management. But again, it could mostly be handled through through a fairly close managed mowing situation, maybe a little bit more labor there on the mowing, if you have to have the ability to sweep your crop. If you're doing off-ground harvesting like pistachios, or obviously, grapes are going to be either mechanically or hand harvested, but that's never hitting the ground. Well, then you want a nice thatch. I mean, it's much nicer walking on a nice carpet of grass, or at least residue, than bare ground. And another issue that California has, particularly when almond harvest is in full swing, is air pollution from all of that dirt that gets blown as those things are being blown to the row middles. Well, if there's a little bit of a thatch there, that can help. Or, if we get to where more people are doing off-ground harvesting, it eliminates a lot of the air quality issues too.
Yeah. So on that note alone, I've heard from 2 growers giving their testimonial about the thatch and when they're mowing, and the 2 effects that they've seen from their their cover crops that are now dried and withered, and they've mowed them down. One of them, he's in a setting here in Yolo County where there's a lot of clay. He's got a pretty heavy clay content in his soil, and so by midsummer his soil's cracking and opening up, and the thatch that he's got from his cover crop is actually starting to bridge and fill those cracks, and so he loses less of the nuts down into those cracks than neighboring growers that aren't having a cover crop mowed down the way he is. He actually, there was a time where he bent over to pick something up, and his phone like slipped out of a pocket or something like that. His phone fell 3 feet down into one of those cracks.
Yeah, dig his phone out.
Yeah, no, they did. They ended up having to get a backhoe to dig his phone out. And so his testimony was like, look, this cover crop is actually making me more money at harvest because of the litter that it's creating, and it's helping fill these cracks in the clay. And the other grower is more down south of Sacramento, in the heart of almond country. I think she's in either Merced or Stanislaus County, and she sees the litter like what you said, that litter, by the time she's doing harvest, it's holding soil together. It's holding that. It's keeping more of the dirt like locked together in that windrow, so it doesn't blow around as much, and so it doesn't create the air issue. But also, if you've got soil that's blowing and it's creating an air quality issue, it also means you're exporting soil, yes, to your neighbor or to the highway or to the fence row or something else. Because if it's up in the air, it's no longer yours.
No.
And so they both have saying that, yes, they've got a couple more mowing passes, but it's having net positive effects for them, and they're not losing harvest. And in one case, he's actually improving his harvest. One of the things that I come to on this, till versus no till, what do I do with the litter above ground, is it seems like it's less expensive to drag a mower through. It's less expensive to drag a mower through an orchard than it is to till, I believe, from a horsepower perspective. One of the growers we talked to also, she rolls, she crimps and rolls, and she's like, it's way less expensive to drag a roller through the orchard than it is a mower. And so from a horsepower, diesel out here in California tipped up to $7 a gallon a month or 2 ago. Oof. It's come back some, but a pass through the orchard with a tractor is real money. It's real time. It's real money. And so if you can pull something through that does the work that you need it to do with less expense on that pass, then that's a net positive as well.
Yeah. So I wanted to make another comment about the cracks. Yeah, because we joke about, well, you can lose your phone in there, or you're going to fill it up with nuts. But and those are, the losing the nuts is a pretty big deal. But the other thing with the cracks is sometimes people look at that and go, well, look at this. When I get a rain, I can take all that moisture right in there. Well, maybe, but the problem is when you have a crack like that, it's going to completely dry that soil out to the depth of your crack. And so if you've got a lot of cracking down 2 feet deep, your soil will dry out very, very quickly to that depth, and not from plants pulling the moisture out, just simply from evaporation. And so it's a horrible water management issue or strategy to have that cracking, and we know that clay will crack, but when it has roots in it, it will do much less, much like what you talked about. So
Yeah.
it's a
Or
great addition to that strategy.
yeah, or if it's got a little bit of organic litter over the top of it, just to keep the temp down and keep some of the
Yes.
humidity in there. So if I'm if I'm a grower and I've been um, avoiding weeds and avoiding cover of all kinds, or if I'm in the annual mode, either of those situations, and now I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go for this perennial cover idea. I want to establish a permanent stand that I can plant once and then maintain, nurture, and have it be part of my permanent setting in the orchard or vineyard. Like, what's the hierarchy or the first, second, third questions I need to consider when it comes to selecting? You mentioned it's more expensive earlier, like, and what's the scale of that? But what do I need to think about from a practical standpoint of that's going to guide me into the species or the species mix that is likely to work?
Well, I don't think it's any different philosophically than if you're doing annuals. And
Okay.
what I mean by that is it all starts with, what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And then based on that, then you go out and you try to, first of all, find the right species to do it. And then you have to understand the, establishment windows, and do you have the planting equipment? All of those sorts of things are going to play into the decisions that you make there. So from a species selection standpoint, when it comes to perennials, again, you have to know your context. What is the context of where you're planting these things? And if the context is, hey, I'm typically going to have some decent winter moisture to get things going. Mediterranean climate means very little rain, a lot of heat through the summer. Well, you got to have things that can handle that. Otherwise, they may work one year, but then they'll kind of die out. And so, again, the bulbous bluegrass is a good fit for that because it does have that pretty deep summer dormancy, heat-induced dormancy, drought-induced dormancy. So, but then with the ability to come back again later. So, with that context, that's a really good choice. Then you have to say, okay, well, I want more than just one thing out there. I want, to have some diversity. So then we start looking for, what are other things that can handle those conditions? So there's some alfalfas out there that can have a drought-induced dormancy. A few of the clovers, but it's more difficult, with that context of being hot and very dry. It limits how many different things you can use in that situation. So I think you just have to, again, look at what your context is, what your goals are. And then as far as, establishment, typically what we look at for, when we're doing perennials versus annuals is we tell guys, you have to look at being willing to spend, probably a 3 to 4x amount on perennial seed versus annuals up front.
Okay.
But know that perennial seed should last you at least 4 to 5 years. So it takes the first 3 years to kind of break even on it from a seed cost standpoint. And then after that, you become more economical with your perennial establishment. Now, if you figure both the seed cost and the cost of seeding, now that might only be a 2 or 3 year, 2 or 3x versus a 4 or 5x. So, but that's what growers have to look at. You can't just look at this as a 1 year expense. When you look at the cost of establishing perennials, you have to kind of amortize that out over a period of time.
Right. Which I think, and I'm optimistic here, but most of the growers we're talking to are in the vineyard or orchard game. They've got tremendous expenses.
Oh man.
To put
they
so from a mind
well.
from a mindset perspective, they know like there's a massive upfront cost.
Yes.
And then, but then I get a, 15, 20, 25, 50 vineyards, some 100-yard, I have something that's going to last a lifetime, in terms of the productive life of it. And so my hope is that, like what you just said, okay, 3 or 4 year return or break even. I don't say return, I'll say break even on seed purchasing, and then boom, in that second year, I'm not seeding, which is inherently more expensive than mowing, and I'm not tilling, which is more expensive than mowing. And so there's some practices that can fall away, implements that aren't being used, aren't being rented, farm service, contract farm work that's not being employed, that costs more than what the future practices are going to be. So that return on investment, that break even comes sooner, which means the ROI comes sooner as well. When you're talking about the selection process, what I come back to, especially for California, where the orchards and vineyards are up and down the West Coast, it seems like cold season perennials are the first tier of species to consider.
Yeah, for sure.
They're gonna thrive when my orchard is, or my vineyard is effectively in its off season, and then hopefully they start to shut down when we're in the peak of our activity.
Yeah. And being from Nebraska, I don't think you can call them cold season. We can call them cool. You guys don't have a cold season. You have a cool season.
Yeah. Cool season.
But yeah. what that does is it gives you more flexibility, because you have things that can survive a frost but don't have to survive, 0 or single digits or anything like that. So that does open it up to having a few more things that can potentially work there. Yeah.
Okay. So if I'm gonna use mowing as my management tool, can annuals, from your perspective, be part of a permanent cover system? If I let them go to seed, is that the key there? Like, can I get the benefit of some annuals in there to mix it up?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that I've had multiple conversations with people about, and I think the answer is yes. They certainly can. Now, when you depend on annuals reseeding themselves, some years that works great, and other years it doesn't. And so what we would want to look for is you would want to look for annuals that have a relatively high hard seed count. And what hard seed means, because those annuals may only make decent seed once every 3 years, just because of growing conditions, how long can they grow, things like that. So when you have hard seed, what that means is that seed will drop to the ground, but the seed coat is hard, or it doesn't take in water, and so it won't come up that next year. It lays there and it waits until conditions are right, or until that seed coat gets scuffed or some of the hardness kind of wears off. It will eventually. But what that means is that seed could come up in 2 years or maybe 3 years, which gives you a larger window of opportunity for that annual to come back up, even if it didn't make seed that same year. So there's some of the clovers have really hard seed counts. Actually, one of the neatest things I saw in one of the almond orchards that I visited a couple years ago was a guy had a really good stand of medics out in his field. Medics are they're a plant family. They're similar to clovers. Yellow blossom sweet clover and alfalfa would be in that medic type family. So they're a clover type plant, but they're not a true clover. But they can often have very high hard dormant seed counts. And so these medics grew really well through the winter, through the fall and the winter, where it was cool and wet. And then instead of a drought-induced dormancy, they just simply went all the way through their life cycle, made seed, and just died of, natural causes, if you will,
Right.
died of age,
Heat.
probably in April, but yet they
Okay.
made seed, and because it was a relatively high hard seed count, he had a nice stand of medics coming back every year.
Okay.
And they grow pretty short, so they match the bluegrass pretty well. So I think that would be an example of a annual crop that could be part of a permanent cover cropping situation,
Right.
because it is going to reseed itself pretty well.
Yeah. You mentioned diversity a couple comments ago. I think we all take it for granted. Diversity is good. We want diversity. But why? Like, it's not my cash crop. I'm just trying to cover the soil, keep living roots there. Like, why is diversity in this setting of any benefit to the system?
Yeah, good question. A lot of the benefits that come through this type of a system. So when you think about regenerative agriculture, or just think of a natural system, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
We again, as humans, we know what we see, and a lot of times we miss what we don't see. A lot of the benefits that are coming aren't just coming through the plants, it's the combination of the plants and the biology. And
Okay.
so the biology is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So for example,
When you say biology, you mean microbes. Is that
microbes, yes. Yeah,
fungi, bacteria, nematodes, all the little critters that are
correct. Yeah. So
in the
for
soil?
example, U.S. agriculture spends $5 billion a year on nitrogen fertilizer. It's one of the biggest expenses we have.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of nitrogen fertilizer that goes into vineyards and orchards, etc. But every acre of crop ground in the world has 30,000 tons of nitrogen in the atmosphere right above it.
Mm.
Our atmosphere is 78% nitrogen, but the plants can do absolutely nothing with that. It's the microbes, it's the bacteria that can take that and turn that into a form that plants can use. And so the plants are great, but without the microbes working with them, they're going to be very limited in what they can do. So it's the combination of the plants and the microbial community working together. But when you have just one type of plant, well, guess
Hmm.
what? You have a very limited scope of microbes in the soil as well. So when we have a diversity of plants, we have a diversity of root systems, we have a diversity of root exudates. They're all carbon based, but there could be thousands of different types of root exudates, and each one of them is going to support a different biological or microbial community. So when we have a diversity of plants, we're going to have a diversity of microbes, which means we have a much more diverse set of services that are now being provided to our cash crop or to our next crop. And
Yeah.
so from a, can I grow a whole bunch of residue to protect my soil above the ground with a monoculture? Absolutely. We can do that all day long. And, from an erosion standpoint, from, keeping the soil covered, we can do that really well with a monoculture. But from having a diverse microbial community, which delivers all of the services that our cash crop's going to need, that really has to come from a diverse plant community above the ground. So to me, that's the biggest part of it. Is I want diversity in my microbial community, and I cannot get that if I don't have a diversity in my plant community. They're inextricably linked together.
Yeah. Okay. So diversity in this context is good as well. I also think about like root types, going back to our El Nino that's on the way, right? And rain and precipitation showing up at unexpected times of year. And I think just from a structural perspective, how how multiple types of roots, Some of them are fine and hairy and in the top 6 inches, and others that are like deep penetrating. How that could also have benefit to just soil structure and water infiltration.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to make a really big difference in how well you can get, the rains that hopefully will come. They will
Yeah,
come. Hopefully they'll come timely. How much of that we can get into the soil is absolutely related to that.
right on. Um, on cost, you mentioned 3 to 4 times. We addressed how there's a quicker path. There's a path to ROI on that. It's not just you're not throwing away money up front. But I do want to make my advertisement for the AMP grant on that note. Is if somebody is looking at that price tag as being a barrier to do this on their entire farm, or even a barrier just to do a pilot planting of perennial cover. Our AMP grant, there was a time a couple years ago where it only focused on one type of seed, the hybrid bluegrass, and it only contributed $1 increment per acre. We got this thing pivoted. There was a lot of turmoil in 2025 with USDA and grants being pulled back, and while that was disruptive, the net output for us and how it relates to a grower improved. Our AMP grant now covers 100% of the seed cost for the first 10 acres. Taxes and shipping are on the grower, but that seed cost is 100% covered. And because we benchmarked it against the bluegrass, which is a pricey seed, we've got about $3,700 worth of seed budget for the first 10 acres. And then the next 100 acres, we've got $100 per acre to cover that seed budget as well. Okay. And so thinking creatively, a grower could say, well, I want to do I want to go with something that's lots of natives, some specialty seeds, some more expensive seed on the first 10. Then they could do, is there a way to is there a seed mix that you're thinking of, or that you could think of that comes in close to that $100 an acre that would fit the perennial or permanent cover goals? Put you on the spot.
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then hey, somebody's gonna maybe they're getting 60 or 70% support, or maybe they're getting 50% support. But I guess my point is we've got a tremendous budget available for people to tap into for with the AMP grant.
Yeah. Well, certainly $100 an acre is going to go a long ways towards some of these perennials. To be honest, I would have to do a little bit more research, because it's not just as simple as saying, well, we want a native perennial mix.
Right.
And anytime you do native seed, it's expensive, very expensive. Sure. And mostly because a lot of these perennials are not, or a lot of perennials, but especially a lot of the native types, they're not great seed producers. And they're also not great at growing by themselves, which means it makes it difficult to grow and harvest seed from them. And so as a result, you typically see your most expensive seed be native perennials, simply because it is very, very difficult to grow a seed crop on that, get it harvested, get it cleaned up, and have it ready to sell to somebody. That's why you see that expense being quite high. I would have to, kind of look at what that would, what type of a native mix would look like for that.
Yeah.
So are you saying that your grant would cover the bluegrass plus whatever else you wanted to put with it? Is that what you're saying?
So our grant also, bluegrass is not required. We can do anything that qualifies as a permanent cover mix, perennial mix, conservation cover. So it could be melic and a hard seeded and a couple hard seeded annuals. It could be anything where it's going to not be terminated. If it's annuals, it's going to be allowed to reseed, and if it's perennials, it's you're just not tilling it. So we really have a lot of latitude now to get creative, and we've got room there to mix it up a little bit, or a lot
Yeah.
actually. So
And
there's a lot of flexibility with it now.
sure. Would if a grower signs up for this grant program, here's me interviewing you now.
Yeah, no, fire away. These are the questions that we need to get out.
If they wanted to be in this program, and let's say they wanted to do 20 acres, does that 20 acres all have to be the same, or could it be 3 or 4 different mixes if they wanted to kind of experiment?
I would encourage experimentation, especially. It can be there's room for experimentation.
Yeah.
So and really, we're finding, while going back to the earliest part of the call, this is not a new idea. This is what's been this is what's been happening in nature for millennia.
Yeah.
And this is what's been happening before we had lots of inputs and tractors and things to do work for us. This has been the standard. So it's not a new idea. Boots on the ground today, talking to growers, it is kind of new. And so I would encourage them, a grower, if they've got the kind of the mental bandwidth and the curiosity to experiment, if they're doing 20 acres planted, do 2 10-acre pilots of mix A, mix B,
Right.
or like you said, do 4 5-acre pilots and tap into the next tranche of funding above the first 10 acres paid for, to tap into that next $100 an acre for the rest of it. Because as you've seen, on millions of acres, you don't know until you put it in the ground, and context, soil type, precipitation that year. There's so many factors that are gonna affect what happens, good or bad. And so if they've got 100 acres and they wanted to test 2 or 3 different iterations in the first year to see what works and what they like, that's totally an option.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and you're right. It's nothing new. Perennial's been around forever, but it's a new application of kind of old methods, and
Yep.
So we do have to kind of relearn, because we have different contexts than row spacings and all sorts of things. Canopies are going to be different. So I love it when people are willing to take the time, and what you're doing is you're taking a lot of the risk out of it, but it still has to be managed, and it's still going to take time. So people are going to have, to be part of this grant, they're really going to have more of a time investment than they are a monetary investment.
Right.
But the dividends that it can pay down the road, could be really large, because they'll learn what does and doesn't work.
Yeah, it's funny, the characteristics that make perennial seed or native seed harder to cultivate and grow commercially are exactly the characteristics that make it a good choice for a permanent cover system. Like, they don't produce a ton of seed because they're more focused on roots. They rely on their roots in the ground for longevity. They don't rely on seed to reproduce every year. They rely on roots for longevity. So there's that. And then they prefer to be in a multiculture, which is what we want. Like, that diversity is good, but because they do best in a multiculture, polyculture setting, it's hard to get their seeds separated. So, like, it's ironic that that's how it works out, but that there's things there that we can leverage and do well with.
Yeah.
So let's wrap it up here soon. What's one thing about NRCS 327? Permanent cover, conservation cover, perennial cover, in the orchard or vineyard context that comes to mind? What's one thing that comes to mind that you would want somebody to leave this conversation with?
Well, I think that everybody should continually challenge themselves to look at their operation and go ask, could this be better? Can I get closer to a natural native type system? Because anytime you can do that, it's going to be less costly to do in the long run. And so I guess that's what I would encourage people to consider or think about of, how can I convert my system to be closer to the native natural? And even if it costs more money upfront, will it be more profitable, more sustainable, more environmentally friendly in the long run? And I think the answer is yes, if you can make it work. And so, the grant program allows you to try to make it work by mitigating some of the financial risk. You need to be investing the time, the management, and the observations to fine tune it for your area. And then what I would love for this to do, and I'm sure it will, I would love it to then morph into, when people do this and have some successes, or even if they have failures, that they share that with their neighbors, they share that with their community, so that now the next person who tries it, can pick up, they can stand on the shoulders of the person that came before them. I mean, again, that's how communities are built. That's how agriculture has been built over the years. I think we've kind of gotten away from that a little bit, and I would love to see us get back to that more community type approach again.
Yeah, and the first thing of what you said about getting back to a natural setup, something that's been resonating with me, or I'm starting to observe more and more as I pay more attention to ag and food systems, is I'm losing trust in any of the systems or the practices or the people that are pitching a greater divide between ecology and what we're doing. Because I feel like the more there's a push to take us away from ecology, somebody's cashing in. Somebody's making money on that division. We'll get your food out of a stainless steel fermenter over here. You can just, it's like, okay, you're cashing in. You're taking me further away from ecology, and you're cashing in on it, and I don't trust it anymore. You guys have the conversely is, the more you can pull towards an ecological system, maybe you're probably buying less things that end inside. You're buying less things that kill the ecology. You're getting more photosynthesis, more microbiology in the soil, things like that. So you're pulling closer to ecology, hopefully with less costs in the process. So you guys have a great tool on your website. Just give us a little advertorial here on what people can find on your website in terms of self-discovery about cover crop, species and planting and mixes and things like that.
Yeah, thanks. We think we have, the best website out there when it comes to resources. Because I taught school for 10 years before I came back, that's just kind of part of our DNA. That's part of who we are, to, educate as much as possible. So we have hundreds of YouTube videos. We have hundreds of blog posts and articles. Some of them we wrote, but many of them are from experts like Christine Jones that I referenced, and John Kemp, who, is one of the smartest agronomists that I personally know. So one of the big advantages that we have is that we know so many people. We have a very large network of experts who, if I call or I send an email, they'll answer, because they know that I will reciprocate that as well. And so we've leaned on that network, and we've had them write articles. We've had them do podcasts. We've had them do webinars, and then that's all available. We put all that out there free for anyone who wants to go and listen or watch. So go to greencover.com. We just redid our website, so it's much easier to search. It's much faster to search. You can come up with those articles much easier. And there's extensive information about over 100 different types of cover crops. Now, most of them are annuals.
Mhm.
We do sell perennials, but that's not where we started. So we don't have as deep of a tranche of resources on perennials yet. That's
Mhm.
something we're working towards. But I would encourage you to go to the website, check it out, look at the webinars, the podcasts, and the articles, and then we have a team of salespeople that we're here to help. We're here to help others. So reach out if you have questions. We'd love to help.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I have spent myself several hours going through your seed selection tool and the website and the resources there, and I can vouch. I can vouch for what you just said, that it's a great resource for anybody in ag, or even just looking to improve the ecology of their landscape, whether it's ag or restoration or a garden or whatnot. So I appreciate that. So we've got the grant where we've got growers that are interested, and we're kind of going through. When we talk to a grower, we ask, what are your goals? What are the guardrails? What are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to avoid? And with that, we will be bringing those goals and guardrails for each producer or grower to you guys as a producer to see what you've got and what you would recommend. And I know you send truckloads, many truckloads of seed. You've got some standard mixes and you custom mixes, I believe. There's no shortage of green cover seed that's coming out to the West Coast, and so we can tap into that supply chain and help hook growers up with what you have. And so we're definitely going to make sure that they have some exposure to what you've got. And I know there's going to be some natural fit there for what our growers that we're supporting are looking for and what you've got. So I really appreciate this.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've been really trying to do, and you're right, we do ship a lot of seed to California, and it becomes very doable when we can ship full semi loads
Mm-hmm.
to kind of distribution points, and then people can come and pick up their seed. It's pretty tough for us to be competitive if I have to ship 5 bags of seed here and 6 bags of seed over there. But
Right.
when we can ship 44,000 pounds, and then people come and pick it up. So we're developing more and more of that, of kind of these drop off locations, and then you come pick it up. So
Good.
yeah, if people are interested, they should contact us and they can find out what those options are. And we'd love to work with folks.
Yeah, and that's why we're doing this now, so that we can get the logistics figured out before harvest.
Yes.
Before we get into the heat, the heated activity of August, September, early October,
Which is going to come earlier this year. I know
Yeah.
some of the vineyard customers that I work with said they're 21 to 24 days ahead of schedule,
Yep.
ahead of normal on where things are going to be. So it will be an early harvest. So
Yep.
yes, that means means you got to prepare sooner.
Yeah, tree nuts as well. And so yeah, it's coming sooner than later. So that's why we're hoping to get a lot of these seed decisions ironed out early, get the AMP grants processed, get the funding up, before the seed's even ordered, and get the logistics for a delivery week figured out ahead of time. So, hey, I'm gonna send you off. It's Friday morning, and I appreciate this hour that you've given us. I love what you guys are doing at Green Cover. Appreciate the support that you bring for growers all over, but especially out here on the West Coast. And I'm looking forward to working with you and your team. So, Keith, thank you so much.
Yep.
Okay, sir.
Thanks, Michael. Right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And let's have a great growing season.
Fantastic. All right. We'll see you.
All right.